Mhm.
How about we go to our main study today?
Oh no, our main study. Yes, let's go there.
Well, it's not a study, really. Well, it is a bit of a study.
Main story.
For all of you scientists out there, which is probably not that many, we're on Twitch after all. Scientific publishing, peer review without gatekeeping. It's um, it's something. Do you want to give an introduction, Yoshi?
Me? This is
Yes.
your story. Okay.
Yeah, but I want to hear your interpretation of it.
Okay, my interpretation. Well, but maybe I should explain, but everyone knows since COVID. Because scientific studies they are performed and then the results are carefully like noted and then written up into a paper that introduces the study, tells you what the scientist has done, and then what the results were, and then there's a conclusion saying like we think these results mean this in the field that we did the study in. Yes, and so this paper, the scientist sent it to a journal, and the journal kind of vets the paper to see if it's of good quality. So there's an editor who first like goes through this paper and says like, "Oh, this is fit for our journal, and I think there is some quality work." Um, so then, if the editor thinks this, maybe the editor thinks this is not fit for this journal, or it's really bad, or something, then nothing will happen. But if the editor thinks it's good enough, it will be sent out for peer review. So these are peers, so other scientists
Not
in
fruit.
pear. I'm saying it correctly, right? Yes, pear is a fruit. Ah, you confused me. Okay. Peers. Other scientists in the field that are working on similar topics, for example, so they know a lot about um, the study that is under peer review. So the editor will send the, the the paper out to these people who know a lot, uh, and these people will read the new paper and they will write down if there are any caveats or things they would have done differently, or if there are any things that they like about study. And they will write it down for the editor. And then traditionally, the editor it gets these peer reviews from the other knowledgeable scientists back and will read them and will say, like, oh, okay, so one was very positive and the other more or less positive, that's okay. Or I had three of them because the two that I first asked they couldn't decide, and two of them are very positive and the third one is very negative. But well, then in these cases the editor may say like, okay, we want to publish this paper in our journal, and then it will be published in the journal, and this is then it's like communicated to the wider community, right, the scientific community, and this all these results and conclusions are published. And the wider community who then reads it will know like, oh, it was this in this journal who judged this paper and wanted to publish it, and they have asked people before they published it, so it's more trustworthy after this whole peer review. Okay,
Ideally.
now I this is the idea. Yeah, so but this is the ideal idea. So now there is a journal, eLife, who said, okay, this is ideally peer review is nice, but we think it can be done better. So they actually they still want to keep the peer review, but they kind of cut out the editor and journal part, where the editor really checks like what is the conclusion of the peer review, right? They
Hmm.
and what I've been doing already, sorry, is publish the peer reviews. So also people who read it later, because they were kept a secret, like they were confidential usually.
So at
So
eLife, they were always public, I think.
always, or they've done that for years or something. I
At
don't know.
least for a while, yes.
Yeah, they have done that for a while. So the peer reviews were always public, or like
I
a
should
long
check. I
time.
have a paper in eLife. I'll have to.
I thought it was only like 1 or 2 years, but it doesn't
Might have
matter.
been more recent, yes.
So they publish these peer reviews because they say a lot about the paper, right? So it's
Hmm.
useful to publish. But now what they're doing, they are cutting out this part where the journal is saying, yes, we want to publish, or no, we don't publish this. So they publish everything that they find fitting to the journal and like good enough to send out for peer review, from what I understand. I mean, I think there will be an initial.
Oh, sorry. Can I just link? So I've looked up my paper, and if you go to the site, there is the decision letter by Rui Costa, who was the editor. Um, So this is basically, here's the summary, and it includes the comments from the reviewers. So this is a
Includes
pretty
study.
old study, and this is our response to it.
Oh.
So this was a study that we published in 2016, I think. Yeah, 2016. I played a small part in this. It was
That's
really a
great.
study by Fred Garas, and the last authors were Pete McGill and Jolan Smit. Um,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. Mhm.
but 2016, and they published the peer review comments together with
Yeah.
our paper.
Okay, so that did it for a longer time.
So this they were one of, I think, one of the first.
Yeah, because there are more that now like have more public peer review, right? Yeah.
Nature
There are more.
Communications used to have it as an optional choice, so the
Mm.
authors could decide whether or not they wanted the peer reviews to be public or not. And from, I think, November onwards in Nature Communications, they will also always be published. So whenever
Yeah.
you read a paper in Nature Communications, you can see what the editors wrote about it. Sorry, what the reviewers wrote about it.
Yeah, what the reviewers wrote, and also the answer from the authors probably then.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. What do I want to say? No, I was confused because in this little piece we're going to talk about, um, um, they also eLife has demanded already that the authors publish their whole pre-published version of the paper on what is that called? A preprint server.
Hmm.
Yeah, so this is when it's not vetted by a journal yet, you can publish your paper on a preprint server.
Hmm.
But yeah, what do I want to say? So, but the big thing is that eLife is like kind of canceling the final editor's decision and will just publish everything that has been peer reviewed, as I understand. Oh, wait, can
Yeah,
I?
so it's not canceling that initial editor decision.
No, no, no,
That
not the initial one. No, no, that's because they are not good. Just if you just write a poem and send it there, they're not going to publish it. You need to write a
that might be if it's
scientific
really
paper.
nice. But yes.
Okay, unless the editor likes your poem a lot, but it's you have to write a scientific paper of some quality so that the editor wants to send it out for review, right? But then if the peer reviewers come back and say it's absolute garbage, then it will still be published, but with like two or three big names in the field saying this is absolute garbage. So
I
it's
don't think the reviewer identities will be revealed.
aha, no, that would be a problem.
Well, it
Yeah,
would. It could be. It's complicated, and
yeah,
again, Nature Communications does this. It allows reviewers to say, "Yes, I want to be acknowledged by name." So if you write a peer review for Nature Communications, you can say, "Yes, let the whole world know that that it was me," or you can say, "Only disclose my name if the peer review reports are published," or or only let my name be known if they're not published. So if only the authors can read it, it's fine to tell the authors that it was me. But if they make my comments public, I don't want my name associated with it. So don't. That's the choice the reviewers have, and I think it's important that reviewers have that choice.
yeah,
I don't think eLife mandates transparent peer review. So here, for my
no,
paper, they just say reviewer 1, 2, and 3.
yeah, no, that makes sense. But they would allow it if the reviewers want their name on there. I
Yes.
think. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's the reviewer's choice. It should be. Um, yes. So what is the thing? So I actually, but I don't have a very strong opinion on this, but I think it's a good development because the publishing system that we have is very much based on paper publishing, right? It's an old system. This is why these preprint servers are so popular right now because that is kind of the new system. Like we can spread knowledge before it's all pre-reviewed, peer reviewed, and printed because we don't need to print it. We can just put it on the internet and everyone can read and have their own opinion on what we wrote.
We
So
saw this really explode during COVID because it was happening so fast,
yeah,
and the traditional peer review uh, can take months because you need to send it out, and then people need to spend a few weeks to read the paper and write their report. Then it needs to come back, and then maybe someone drops out, so they don't write their report. You need to find another reviewer, and then the authors need to fix their paper. They need to fix the things that are wrong with it,
may
and
do extra experiments.
do extra experiments. It can easily take half a year between when a paper is first submitted and when it's actually published. And preprint servers don't have that the time limit. So if you as soon as your paper is done, you can put it online. People can read it in its unofficial, unverified form,
Yeah,
and that helps. If you have a pandemic and every week counts,
yeah.
being this quick really helps.
Yeah. But then that's also how I started my story about peer review. That's when the public learned that there is a difference between preprint and peer reviewed. So,
Yeah.
like journalists wrote sometimes in the beginning of the articles, there has been a new paper. It's not peer reviewed yet, but it says that COVID, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I think that was very interesting about the pandemic too, how it
Hmm.
was reported. But what do you want to say? Yes, no, preprints are important, but also the judging of the science and critical reading of science is important. I think it would be actually like if I would be a student now, like if you're a master student, it would be super interesting to read peer reviews with the paper, right? To have a class and then read the paper together and then also look at the reviews that were there. And like I think like the publishing of this is very interesting. I think it's
So
a
what a lot of scientists do, what a lot of labs do, is a thing called they call journal club, where
yeah,
basically they read a paper, as a lab, and then discuss the paper. And I think for journal clubs, especially, having those
reviews.
expert
Amazing.
reviews
Yeah,
available might be
because
super useful.
in the journal club you always guess which experiment was reviewer suggested. So like, and now you don't have to guess.
Sometimes you're like, why did the authors do this experiment? And then you're like, it was probably the reviewers who questioned it.
Um,
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
so no, I think it's a good idea.
So let's talk about what's actually changing here. So what
Yeah,
eLife is doing is, like Yoshi said, they after peer review they will not reject papers anymore. They will, as soon as it goes out for peer review, it will be published. But there's still that initial editor decision. So the editor will still determine if this is, if the paper is of high enough quality, of high enough impact to be published.
and
And yeah,
also if it fits the scope of the journal, because certain
yeah, no, that's
journals.
not relevant. eLife
No,
is a broad journal; it doesn't have a
yeah,
scope.
that's true. That's
I mean,
true.
it's neuroscience, but
True.
um, or biological sciences, but it's not, it's not like a specialized the journal of the hypothalamus.
No, you're right. So maybe that's not relevant.
It's not really an issue. No, so the editor will basically just determine what gets published and what doesn't, which always happened. And people were saying, "Oh no, we're giving editors more power with this system." That's nonsense. Editors always had all of the
Yeah,
power.
that they
So
have to
I
make like they
I
get
used
less
to work
power.
as a professional editor for Nature Communications for a year, and let me, if we wanted a paper out or not, that was a very easy decision, and the authors can appeal, and that will go to another editor, but usually they agree. There's usually a reason why we want or do not want a paper published, and it's not like this gives editors more power than they already had.
It gives them less power, no?
In a way,
Or a little.
a little bit, yes, because if you now think, okay, we've made that initial decision, but we're not quite sure about a paper. Sometimes you're not sure. You
Yeah,
think, okay, this looks interesting, but it's a little bit outside my own expertise, which happens especially for professional editors because they typically handle a very broad range of papers because that's their day job. So there are also scientific editors who are basically scientists who occasionally edit a journal. So, they will maybe have one or two articles a week that they handle, really specialized to their field. But professional editors, for full-time editors, they'll get all sorts of things, and they might not be intimately familiar with the specific topic. So they will typically, if something is borderline, they're not quite sure, they'll discuss it within their team. They can consult other editors who may be more familiar with it. But often, borderline cases do get sent out for review, and we'll say, let's see what the reviewers say. And that even goes for scientific editors. If a paper has multiple techniques and they're very familiar with one technique or one topic, but the paper is very broad and they don't know the other aspects of it, and say, okay, well, the electrophysiology of this paper looks really good, but I don't know about the fMRI data in this paper. I'm not an fMRI specialist.
yeah,
And then they can send it to the peer reviewers, and maybe one of the peer reviewers says, well, yeah, maybe the EFIS is good, but the fMRI data is really subpar, and it contains flaws, and it's just not scientifically valid. And then editors will reject that paper based on those concerns, and that last option is now no
in
longer available.
yeah,
Why that is important is, like Yoshi said, ultimately it means you're normally, if you have your gamut of papers that you would publish, you would cut off the lower, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% that didn't make it past the peer reviewers. It wasn't good enough according to the peer reviewers. And now you are going to still publish those. How eLife will handle this will depend. Theoretically, they could go two ways. They could either keep the same, initial decision process, not change their criteria for that initial editor decision. So basically, instead of rejecting that lower third or whatever, they're now keeping it, and the average quality of papers or the average impact of papers published in eLife will go down. Or alternatively, they can become more strict with that for initial editorial decision. You can just say, if it's a borderline decision, we're just going to reject it now because we don't want to send it for peer review and then have to publish it if it might not be good.
So do they say anything about this in their publication written thing?
They do not.
Because this is what I was
At least
wondering.
not that I could find. I think it may also be up to the handling editors. And again, for eLife, the handling editors are all scientists. So these are all scientists who do the editing on the site. It's not their day job. So what they will do instead, rather than reject the paper, is they will give an editorial assessment where they say, okay, this paper ranks, from, they have this scale for it. Let me look it up. Where is it? The eLife assessment, they call it. So this is let me put it up on screen. So for significant of findings, they have a 5-point scale, and for the strength of support, so it's either landmark, fundamental, important, valuable, or useful. And this support is either exceptional, compelling, convincing, solid, incomplete, or inadequate. So basically they say, okay, this paper, will be this important for the field. If it's really important, then everyone should read it. Where if it's useful, then maybe only people who are really into this one specific minor subfield might be interested in it. And the strength of support is kind of an independent thing where you say, okay, the evidence is really good. They did a really good job. They have a lot of multiple lines of evidence that supports the conclusions. Or, maybe it's inadequate. Maybe, the experiments they did don't actually prove the conclusions that they claim.
But that's very good, actually, because then the journal really adds, the editor and the reviewers together, they really add something to the paper if they put these, key points.
Absolutely. So the thing is, before or with traditional journals, these two important points are still very important. Mercado asks the fee of $2,000. Doesn't that mean you can buy publications which can come in handy for field sale expert? Yes, and that kind of relates to a thing called predatory journals. That are journals that will publish basically anything as long as you pay them. $2,000 is actually cheap. I know it's there's a lot of work involved in being an editor.
Yeah,
and eLife does a pretty good job, I think, at the editorial assessment. But would you want to publish a paper that has inadequate support? You're basically saying we'll publish this paper even though the conclusions aren't really supported by the science. I wouldn't. And
but I don't know. But that doesn't make sense because you say that the lack of rejection after peer review will hurt the authors because they will have a paper with inadequate.
No, it will hurt the journal. The authors can choose to keep improving their paper. So that's the thing. After each round of peer review, the authors can say, okay, well, they find our evidence inadequate. Either we stop here and we don't do any more work and we keep it as is, and that's how our paper will be known as. Or we do more experiments, and then maybe the strength of support will increase, and we add more evidence to support our conclusions, and then maybe that will go up and up and up and up. And they can keep doing this. They can keep adding strength of support until they're happy with it, and then they can say, okay, well, this will be the version of record. This will be as much experiments as we're gonna do. That's our final ranking, and that's how we publish it.
Yeah. But as a journal, you think you don't want to publish things with inadequate supporting data?
Well, that's the thing, right? Apparently, eLife does, and that has been it's confused the entire field, I think. of publishing and scientists who are now like, okay, but is that even going to be read? Maybe it's like preprints and people don't really care about that editorial assessment box and they're just going to read, well, it's a published peer-reviewed paper, so it must be good, even if the evidence of support is inadequate. And that, I think, would harm the trust in the journal. And that, again, may in turn change the impact factor of the journal. Like, the journal won't get high quality papers anymore because people with high quality papers say, well, you publish anything. So publishing with eLife doesn't, confer that rank of quality. So I will send it somewhere else now to another journal. Um, and that's going to be a massive problem, I think, for eLife if it turns out that that is the case. We don't know yet. We'll have to see what the authors are going to do, what scientists are going to do, if they're going to keep sending good papers to eLife. I don't know. And the other comment is, you have this ranking scale, and it's kind of supposed to replace the journal impact factor. Because, previously, if you had a really good article, if you had a really good bit of science, you would send it to a really high-ranked journal. And then, if they don't want it, they reject it, you send it somewhere lower, and then maybe they reject it, and you send it somewhere lower again, until eventually, you find a journal that does want to publish it. And, wherever a paper gets published, that's basically how good it is. That's its final score. And instead of having that final score, eLife is now saying, okay, we'll have, our own score of 0, 1 to 5 for the significance and the strength of support, which is great if they do it for every paper. But if they also, stay selective and only publish papers that meet their criteria, then, your ranking only really applies to papers that get sent to eLife. So, you have this very narrow range.
Yeah.
Like an eLife paper will remain an eLife paper. It won't become a Nature paper or a Cell or a Science paper just because it was in eLife but ranked as a landmark study. So
That's true. Except for, wait, this is a good idea. Well, nature will not disappear, but imagine if nature disappeared, then it would be a good idea. Because of the point Maricado made actually with the fees. So eLife has a pretty low fee compared to other journals, I assume. I don't know.
Nature charges about $11,000 per paper
Yeah. So
for gold open
if
access.
if you get into eLife but get ranked high, so people see your publication as more valuable than like a standard eLife publication would be now, then this would be good for labs that don't, maybe they work for a place, a country where science funding is not so abundant, and they could still publish something and show the world that their work is sound, right? Without spending a lot and spending a lot of time sending it to different journals and everything.
In
So with
theory,
that,
yes.
in theory, that is like, I think this is the thing that eLife is trying to improve, or one of the things.
But that crucially depends on the people who are evaluating papers. Okay, say you want to become a professor somewhere, then you tell the
Oh yeah,
university, I've published, a paper in Nature, I've published a paper here, I published a paper here, and then, the university gets hundreds of applicants, and they just filter out. They filter out anyone who doesn't publish high enough.
yeah,
That's the first step. Anyone who didn't have a, I don't know, paper in at least an impact factor 15 journal, out. If you do that, and you say, well, I have an eLife paper that was a landmark, if the university doesn't care about that,
yeah,
or the promotion committee or the grant committee that's going to give you money, if they don't care about that eLife rank, or if they don't trust it, it's pointless.
yeah.
And just like Yoshi said, if Nature would disappear, if all the journals would disappear and we only had this eLife rating,
It would be
then it makes
perfect.
sense. I think then it would make sense. It could theoretically transform scientific publishing as we know it. And just like Yoshi said, then we'd only have to, I say only, we'd only have to spend $2,000 per paper, which is a lot less than what most journals now ask. Nature Communications is 5,500. Nature Neuroscience is 9,000, I think. Nature is 11,000. Like, it's
But
really expensive.
yeah.
There's a reason for that, but
So I think eLife is doing this because eLife has this idealistic vision, right, of more open science and changing the publishing and everything. So, and someone has to start it, because if no one starts it, you don't even, like you say, now you don't know what, like, the senior faculty who's judging the applications, what they will think and if they will look at it. But like, as long as no journal starts even with changing something, if all the journals just go on in that traditional way, like no one will ever have to look at anything else than what is it, age indexes. So yeah, so someone has to start it. So I think it's like in that way it's a courageous and idealistic thing of eLife to do. Maybe they, because it could be that they kill themselves with this, right? Like it's a big problem for them as a journal to do this.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. Like somebody
Yeah,
had to start it.
yeah,
You know,
otherwise
if we want to change scientific publishing, and I think that's still, I won't comment on that. I think there are issues with scientific publishing. I don't think it's completely broken. I think just
no,
there
it's
are
like,
issues.
yeah,
That's true.
and
And eLife is attempting to solve these issues. And theoretically, this is, I think, a good idea, a good method to solve that. But I also only, I think it can only work if it becomes ubiquitous, if it
yeah,
becomes big enough
yeah,
that pretty much everyone will have that ranking system. And if the ranking system between journals remains stable, or if there only exists one massive journal that ranks everything.
yeah.
And I don't
But
see that happening.
I don't know. But did you see this happening when the preprints first happened?
But
Like this.
preprints don't require all the other journals to stop existing.
No, but it used to be that bigger journals would not even accept your paper if you had already pre-printed it, and they have started accepting. So like
Sure,
they
but
also adapt, right?
yeah, they will adapt. And open access, I mean, for example, Nature
Yeah,
Communications was founded as an open access journal, in part in response to journals like eLife existing. But the initial goal, the founding goal of eLife, was to provide a sort of, scientific oriented, like a from scientists for scientists journal that could compete with Cell, Nature, and Science, like with the top
yeah.
journals.
So this is not good for competition, you think?
I th- I expect,
Environmental
I
publishing.
would love to be proven wrong, that this move will decrease the impact of eLife,
Yeah,
and that in return will make it less relevant, and in return, will waste some of its leverage that it has. Some people have suggested, instead of changing eLife into this system, they should just start a new uh, journal, eLife Classic or whatever, eLife
that
Lite.
the old one would be eLife Classic. This
Yeah,
would be eLife 2.0.
yeah. But that suffers from the problem. If you start a new journal, then that new journal won't have any impact. It's very difficult to start a new journal because scientists, it's a chicken egg story. If no scientist sends articles to your journal, you can't reject articles, and you have to take everything you get. And then, what you get might not be of high quality. And if your journal publishes articles that are not of high quality, then in return,
Factor was
it
down.
won't get a high impact factor, and then people won't read it, and people won't send their papers to it. It is very difficult to get a journal of, from the ground up. Um, the big publishers have a trick of this. If you publish, for example, if you send a manuscript, for example, to Nature or Nature Neuroscience, and Nature Neuroscience says, we don't like it, but have you considered Nature Communications? They instruct authors to redirect, to move their papers from one journal, one
Within
rank
their
down,
own.
one rank down, and one rank down. And that's how the other journals within that Nature family got started, essentially. It's a dirty trick, but it works.
But eLife is established, so they could do the dirty trick. I
They
mean,
could theoretically do that. They could say, okay, any journal or any paper that's not good enough for eLife, we can send it to eLife Guaranteed, where it
oh
will
yeah,
guaranteed get published. That
good
would have been
thing.
one way of doing it, but yeah, how many people would take them up on it? I don't know.
Yeah, and then you
Um,
get like then you get that this eLife guaranteed new journal has a lower ranking than eLife by
yeah, and even
default.
if you say you send it to eLife Guaranteed and it gets a landmark significant finding, well then okay, it's an eLife Guaranteed landmark, which is still lower than
Than
eLife
eLife, yeah, because otherwise they
because it
wouldn't.
was rejected by eLife.
Yeah, so it doesn't really work for this concept. Then you prove the concept wrong before you even started it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a very difficult situation. There's been a crap ton of talk about it on Twitter,
yeah,
including from me. I find it fascinating. I think it's a really interesting approach. I just don't think it can work. Like it can't achieve the goal it set out to achieve. If the goal is to basically assess every paper that comes out, provide peer review for it, and then give it a ranking that's relevant and will be used by the people that need such rankings, that want to use such metrics. On the other hand, what Joshi said, somebody has to start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we
Exactly.
shall we leave it at this?
Yes. We can
I
leave
could
it.
go on and on, but
I think it's enough for now. Maybe next week you can get back to it.
maybe. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much for hanging out with us, and then I think we'll end our brains matter here.